It all started on one of those scorching July afternoons when the sun seemed determined to melt everything in its path, and I had just finished installing the final plank in the new fence that separated my private property from the HOA-managed recreation area. That fence, sturdy, 8 feet tall, and reinforced with motion detectors, wasn't just a boundary, it was a message. For too long, Karen, the relentless HOA President of Whispering Pines Estates, had treated my adjacent land as an extension of her fiefdom. The final straw came 2 weeks earlier when I caught 3 teenagers splashing around in my private pool, laughing, tossing a football, and claiming that Karen said it was community shared space. It wasn't. That pool, that property, every inch of it down to the mineral rights, was mine. I had the deeds, the permits, the surveys, and the lawyer to prove it. Karen's entitlement knew no bounds. Ever since I bought the 3-acre property that bordered the rear of the HOA's gated neighborhood, she had been looking for ways to assert dominance. It began with her showing up unannounced, clipboard in hand, citing imaginary HOA bylaws she swore applied to me. Then came the letter's passive-aggressive notes about lawn care, fence aesthetics, and, most recently, my decision to install a pool. When that didn't deter me, she resorted to the next best tactic, coercing other residents to treating my land like a shared amenity. The day I confronted Karen was the day she lost the carefully constructed composure that she wielded, like a weapon in board meetings. She was standing at the edge of my newly installed gate, arms folded, her oversized sunglasses reflecting the glare of the afternoon sun. "I've received several complaints about your decision to restrict pool access," she said, voice sharp with disapproval. "This kind of exclusivity isn't in the spirit of Whispering Pines." "Karen," I said slowly, as if explaining to a child, "this property is not part of Whispering Pines. This pool is on private land. I paid for it," I maintain. And I didn't invite anyone. "But the community has no claim here." I cut her off. "This land has never been under HOA control." The county confirmed it. "You know this?" She bristled. "You don't have to be so rude. This kind of behavior gets reported." And it did. 30 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived, responding to a call from Karen Mitchell, HOA President, alleging a disturbance and possible aggressive behavior by a man denying rightful community access to a shared amenity. Thankfully, I was ready. My security system, installed by one of the best firms in the county, recorded everything: video, audio, timestamps. When the deputies stepped onto my porch, I invited them in, offered cold water, and handed over a USB drive. "It's all there," I told Deputy Halloran, a middle-aged officer who looked like he'd dealt with Karen before. Footage of her trespassing, footage of her instructing kids to hop the fence, and audio of her trying to intimidate me. Karen, who had followed the deputies up the driveway, tried to interject. "He's manipulating the narrative. That footage is edited. You can't trust him." But Halloran was already scanning through the files on his patrol tablet, P's partner nodding as the images played out in crisp HD, Karen pointing to the pool and ushering neighborhood kids through a side gate. Karen arguing with me about shared responsibility, Karen, threatening to call the police twice. "Ma'am," Halloran said evenly, "you need to leave the premises. This property is clearly marked private, and the owner has every right to restrict access. Any further attempts to enter will be considered criminal trespass." Karen's mouth opened and closed, words forming and dying before they could be spoken. She glared at me like I had personally offended the Queen. "You'll regret this," she spat, turning on her heel. I thought that was the end of it. For 2 days, things were quiet. No trespassers, no HOA emails. I went about my business, landscaping around the pool, upgrading the lighting system, and installing an automated gate at the end of the driveway. But I underestimated how vindictive Karen could be. On the 3rd morning, I woke to find a notice tacked onto my front gate. "Urgent HOA violation pool. Fencing non-compliant. Fines pending." I laughed, literally laughed out loud. It was so ridiculous, I almost framed it. Karen had created a fake violation based on non-existent jurisdiction. But I didn't just laugh. I called my lawyer, Mitchell Pearson, who had a reputation for being as fierce as a pit bull with a badge. "Get ready," I told him. "She's escalating." Mitchell chuckled. Well, she picked the wrong person to harass. Let's play. Within 48 hours, Mitchell drafted a cease and desist letter, citing Karen personally and the HOA collectively for harassment, false reporting, and slander. He also forwarded the footage to a local journalist who had previously covered HOA corruption. We didn't even need to push, the story sold itself. Homeowner fights back against HOA tyranny. Pool dispute caught on tape. The story went viral. Local news picked it up first. Then it was shared on Facebook, Reddit, and even made it into a segment on a national news network under a piece titled Private Property versus HOA Overreach. Karen was livid. She held a special HOA meeting and attempted to defend her actions, claiming she was only protecting the community. But the footage didn't lie. One of her fellow board members, a woman named Celeste, who had long been tired of Karen's antics, resigned on the spot, citing moral differences and mismanagement. Meanwhile, filed for a protective injunction, legally barring Karen from approaching my property. The court granted it, citing the repeated attempts to fabricate authority and misuse of emergency services. Still, Karen wasn't done. She tried to launch a petition to have the city rezone my land, hoping to force me under HOA control. She didn't know was that I'd already bought influence where it mattered. I had contributed generously to local conservation initiatives, partnered with county officials on environmental planning, and hosted town hall barbecues that most of the community, including several Whispering Pines residents, tended happily. The city council laughed her proposal out of the chamber. The final nail came when Mitchell unearthed a cache of HOA emails obtained legally through a resident whistleblower that showed Karen had authorized the use of HOA dues to pay for legal consultations and surveillance targeting me personally. That was a massive violation. We sued the HOA, Karen personally, and the board collectively for harassment, misuse of funds, and defamation. A settlement was reached in mediation. The HOA had to issue a public apology, pay a 5-figure fine, and remove Karen from her position. She was barred from holding office in any HOA for the next 10 years. Karen moved within 3 months, her reputation in ruins. As for me, I expanded my property, at a guest house, a second pool, and a privacy hedge so tall no one could peek in if they tried. And I had the footage. Oh, I had the footage, still saved, still viral, still playing on loop anytime someone Googled Karen HOA pool incident. Justice wasn't just served, was recorded in 4K. In the aftermath, the neighborhood experienced an unexpected transformation. Freed from Karen's micromanagement, Whispering Pines residents began engaging more positively with each other. New board members were elected people with a genuine interest in cooperation rather than control. Community events blossomed, parties were thrown, and mutual respect was gradually restored. Mitchell and I even received thank you letters from some of the residents who had once avoided me. One even invited me to speak at their HOA town hall about property rights and boundaries. It was ironic, but I accepted. The crowd applauded when I recounted the legal battle and the lessons learned. But perhaps the sweetest moment came when a local university reached out to license my footage and case records for use in their law school's course on property rights and HOA overreach. Karen had tried to make an example out of me, but in the end, I became the case study that would warn future HOA leaders against abusing power. Now, as I sit on my patio, sipping iced tea by the glimmer of my pool, peaceful, private, and holy, my own sometimes glanced toward the spot where Karen once tried to assert her empire. It's quiet now. It's just the wind, the trees, and the ripple of water. And on the wall of my study, that infamous notice framed and gilded. Urgent HOA violation. Pool fencing non-compliant. A trophy. A reminder. A victory. 2 weeks after Karen's forced departure and the settlement that sealed her fate, the neighborhood had changed. But I knew better than to let my guard down. Power-hungry types like her often leave behind others eager to fill the vacuum. And as I would soon learn, Karen's former vice president, a man named Gerald Thornton, wasn't ready to let the spotlight dim on Whispering Pines HOA just yet. It began with small things. Curt notes slid under my gate about continued cooperation. Complaints about how my new privacy hedge obstructed the view of nature paths. The subtle warnings that the community is watching. But I wasn't the same person I was when Karen first tried to bend me. I was prepared, protected, and well-connected. Gerald's attempts felt like cheap sequels to a blockbuster he didn't understand, but I still took him seriously, mostly, because my peace wasn't negotiable anymore. Mitchell, my ever-sharp lawyer, advised patience, but we both knew that the moment Gerald stepped over the line, we'd be ready. And oh, did he step over it? One late August morning, I noticed an unfamiliar SUV parked on the service road by the creek that divided my property from Whispering Pines' boundary. Curious, I approached, only to find Gerald clipboard and hand-snapping photos of my greenhouse. This structure violates setback ordinances for adjacent HOA properties, he said, without looking up. I raised an eyebrow. Not zoning. Enforcement. And this greenhouse is 15 feet into my property. Your HOA doesn't have any say here. He smiled in that smug way that makes your fists itch. That's yet to be proven. I've sent inquiries to county zoning. Don't be surprised. If you receive a letter soon, what he didn't realize was that I already had copies of those zoning records. In fact, it was my petition years ago that helped reestablish the boundaries that excluded my property from HOA oversight.
Oh.
But Gerald wasn't interested in facts. He was playing a political game, trying to bait me into confrontation. I walked back to my cabin, not saying another word, and called Mitchell. He's escalating, I said. Then let's return the favor, Mitchell replied. What followed was a quiet war, chess match, fought through paper, pixels, and policy. Gerald began organizing HOA walkthroughs along the trail that ran near my eastern fence. Groups of residents would gather, many holding phones, some taking notes. One elderly man with binoculars would just stare for hours. I installed more motion. Detectors updated my perimeter cameras and ensured every encounter was logged and date-stamped. When Gerald filed a formal complaint to the county, alleging that my pool shed violated stormwater runoff laws, we responded with a 27-page rebuttal. That included geological surveys, permits, and environmental impact assessments signed by county engineers. The complaint was dismissed within 72 hours, but it didn't end there. Next came the smear campaign. Gerald, using HOA newsletters and private resident groups, began spreading half-truths claims that I had threatened children who came near. My fence, that I had endangered wildlife with pesticides, and that I was an aggressive loner looking to sabotage community unity. It would have worked, to accept I had every one of his accusations disproven in real time. Video footage, screenshots, testimonies from neighbors who had come to know me better since the whole Karen incident. Gerald's lies began to unravel and fast. And then, the mistake. A motion was introduced in an HOA meeting to try and purchase the small parcel of public land adjacent to mine to install a new community garden. The catch? The land in question wasn't public. I had bought it 3 months earlier after Karen's removal, quietly acquiring the deed through a nonprofit conservation partnership. When Gerald presented his grand plan in the meeting, I was already waiting outside the building with Mitchell, beside me, and a folder in hand. We walked in during the open comment period. I stood before the group, held up the deed, and announced, "You're welcome to garden on my land if you bring a permit and sign a rental agreement. Otherwise, stay off." The silence that followed was delicious. Gerald sputtered and fumed, but the residents had had enough. Karen was one thing they'd been loyal to her for years. But Gerald was a pale imitation, and my reputation, strangely enough, had shifted. I was no longer the recluse with the fancy pool. I was the man who'd stood his ground, legally and ethically, while defending his rights. Within 2 weeks, Gerald was removed from the board by a community vote. New president Maria Alvarez, soft-spoken, middle-aged woman with a background in nonprofit mediation, took over and sent me a letter the next day. It simply read, "We value respectful boundaries. Thank you for your patience." I wanted to believe the battle was finally over, but one more surprise lay in wait. Karen. Her name popped up in a court filing Mitchell brought to my attention. She had tried to file a civil suit claiming damages to her reputation and emotional distress. It was a long shot, a desperate attempt, to to claw back at a situation where she had clearly overreached. But she had found a sleazy attorney willing to file the paperwork. Mitchell smiled when he handed me the document. This won't hold up, but it's our chance to counterclaim. We filed a motion to dismiss, which was accepted almost immediately, but we didn't stop there. We countersued for legal harassment, attempted defamation, and punitive damages. The judge ruled in our favor. Karen was ordered to pay court costs, a portion of our legal fees, and issue a retraction letter. That letter now hangs in a frame beside the HOA violation notice. Bookends to a saga I never asked to star in. Life today is quieter, peaceful. The fence still stands tall. The pool glistens in the afternoon sun, and the only people on my property are guests I invite personally. I built a fire pit near the lake and host barbecues for friends, family, and even some Whispering Pines residents. Mutual respect has replaced paranoia. The community thrives in its own way, and I thrive in mine. Sometimes, when the breeze carries laughter from the trails beyond my land, I smile not because I won a fight, but because I proved something deeper. That one person standing up for what's right, armed with the truth, can outlast even the most determined tyranny. HOA Karens may rise, but they always forget one thing. The law doesn't bend to entitlement. And I have the receipts to prove it. And as life settled into its new normal, I invested more time into creating something meaningful on the land that had been the epicenter of so much chaos. I began a mentorship program for local teens interested in agriculture and property law. We converted part of the greenhouse into a teaching space, brought in local experts, and even hosted field trips from schools that had never imagined a classroom surrounded by nature and legal precedent. What began as a defense of property had evolved into a platform for education and empowerment. The cabin. Once my fortress transformed into a symbol of resilience and learning, visitors now see not just a man who defended his land, but a neighbor willing to share his journey so others wouldn't have to fight the same battles. I even published a book titled Fences and Freedom, chronicling the whole ordeal from the pool invasion to the courtroom victories. It sold modestly, but more importantly, it sparked conversations across the country. I was invited to speak at conferences and homeowner summits. The irony of becoming a poster child for HOA reform wasn't lost on me. Karen eventually moved to a coastal town where I heard she now lives under a much stricter HOA. Gerald, on the other hand, took a job far away, out of public life entirely. Whispering Pines thrived under Maria's leadership, and the boundary between us became a bridge rather than a wall. We hosted joint community events and celebrated holidays as neighbors, not adversaries. And every time I sit by my fire pit, surrounded by new friends and old allies, I remember how close I came to giving in, to backing down. But I didn't. And now my land is more than protected. It's honored. It's a legacy. Because the best kind of justice isn't just winning a fight. It's changing the game so no one has to fight it again.